I'm John Strum, and this is Realtalk MS. It's June 28th, and we have a lot to talk about. Just a couple of weeks ago, I released episode number 250 of Realtalk MS. And even as I say it, that number seems unbelievable to me. I am so grateful for all the support this podcast continues to receive. And of course, I'm especially grateful that so many of you keep listening every week. As of today, members of the Realtalk MS community have downloaded and listened to those 250 episodes more than 1.5 million times. And I'm so proud that our listener community is truly a global community. I literally shake my head in disbelief when I consider that Realtalk MS has listeners who live just a couple of miles away from me, and listeners who live as far away as Russia, China, South Korea, Singapore, Mozambique, Bahrain, the UAE, Nigeria, and another 100 different countries. When I began thinking about launching Realtalk MS, one of the first things I did was listen to other podcasts for the MS community. 5 years ago, there weren't nearly as many podcasts focused on MS as there seem to be today, but one of the podcasts that I listened to was FUMS. And I remember after listening to that podcast, feeling inspired about moving forward with my plans and launching this podcast. Joining me today to talk about how she went from being diagnosed with MS to launching her podcast and learning how patients get paid is the voice and the energy behind the FUMS podcast, Kathy Reagan Young. But before we get to my conversation with Kathy, there are a few other things that you should know about. It seems like over the past few months, we've talked a lot about efforts to repair myelin, and that's a very good thing, because repairing myelin means restoring function that's been lost due to MS. And there seems to be a growing list of institutions and companies who are focusing on myelin repair. The latest announcement comes from France, where Find Therapeutics has joined forces with SATT Connectus, a French technology transfer network. This collaborative effort has licensed the work of Dr. Dominique Bagnard at the Strasbourg Institute for Drug Discovery and Development. Dr. Bagnard's team conducted the research that led to the development of this potential myelin repair therapy. Dr. Bagnard's work has proven to be successful in restoring myelin in animal models of MS, and so we have one more horse in the race to successfully develop a therapy that will not only slow MS progression, but restore lost function. The final answer isn't quite right around the corner, but the race is definitely on. The majority of people living with MS experience bladder problems, including urinary incontinence, which can have a major impact on quality of life. So it's encouraging to hear that Dysport, a form of purified botulinum toxin, has received a positive opinion in Europe for managing urinary incontinence in adults with neurogenic detrusor overactivity, or more simply put, an overactive bladder. This opinion is specifically for people experiencing an overactive bladder due to MS or spinal cord injury and who regularly require a catheter to drain urine. With this opinion being issued, countries in the European Union can now grant marketing approval to Dysport. Dysport has already been approved for easing upper and lower limb spasticity for people living with MS. It works by blocking the nerve signals to the muscle into which it's injected. And in treating an overactive bladder, that procedure requires injecting the botulinum toxin into the detrusor muscle, or the bladder muscle. Ipsen, the company that's developed Dysport, launched 2 phase 3 clinical trials, which included 485 participants, 70% of them with urinary incontinence due to spinal cord injury, and 30% with urinary incontinence due to MS. The participants were randomly divided into a group that received a lower dose of Dysport, a group that received a higher dose of Dysport, and a group that received a placebo. The study participants were followed for up to 2 years, and the outcome of the clinical trials showed that both Dysport groups experienced an average reduction of 22 episodes of incontinence per week. And that translated into a significantly higher quality of life as measured by a 22-item incontinence quality of life questionnaire that the participants filled out. What's especially interesting is that 40% of the participants in the Dysport groups realized benefits after just one injection, and they didn't require another injection for the duration of the study. So people living with MS who are experiencing an overactive bladder in any of the European Union countries will soon have what seems to be an effective treatment that will not only improve their urinary health, but will vastly improve their overall well-being. If you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. When we think of scientific advances that are designed to improve the lives of people living with MS, we often think of discoveries that lead to new pharmaceutical therapies, a new pill, a new injection, or a new infusion. But advances are also being made in the science of rehabilitation. And a company called Exobionics is the first company to receive FDA clearance to market its robotic exoskeleton for use by people living with MS. Now, an exoskeleton is a battery-powered robotic suit that's strapped over a person's clothing, enabling that person to stand and walk. About a year ago, in episode 198 of Realtalk MS, we talked with Dr. Brian Sandroff at the Kessler Foundation about the results of his pilot study that showed how a robotic exoskeleton was effective in facilitating exercise rehabilitation among people living with MS who had already experienced significant physical disability. If you'd like to listen to my conversation with Dr. Sandroff, you'll find that link in today's show notes. And today, the science that we discussed with Dr. Sandroff just a year ago has advanced to the point of having the first robotic exoskeleton cleared by the FDA for use by people with MS. ExoNR, the latest generation robotic exoskeleton developed by Exobionics, has already been approved for use by stroke patients, people rehabilitating spinal cord injury, and people rehabbing acquired brain injury. As Dr. Sandroff's pilot study showed, using a robotic exoskeleton opens up effective physical rehabilitation for people living with MS, even and maybe especially for those who are living with significant disability. So please feel free to start asking your physical therapist when you'll be ready to test drive an ExoNR robotic exoskeleton. While I'm not sure if Kathy Reagan Young will be out there test driving a robotic exoskeleton, although I can see her doing that, I know for a fact that she's been fearlessly sharing the story of her MS journey and featuring the stories of other members of the MS community on her most appropriately named FUMS podcast. In a moment, we'll meet my guest, Kathy Reagan Young. When I was thinking about launching Realtalk MS, one of the first things I did was I tried to listen to some of the other podcasts for the MS community, and I remember listening to the FUMS podcast. For one thing, the title, the name of that podcast kind of sticks in your mind because it's so highly appropriate. I remember listening to that podcast and being inspired by it and thinking, yeah, I want to go ahead and start my podcast. So today it's really a pleasure to welcome the host of the FUMS podcast and the Patients Getting Paid podcast, Kathy Reagan Young. Welcome to the podcast, God. Kathy.
Hi, John. Thank you so much. I'm all verklempt. You got me all teary-eyed. Thank you for that nod. I appreciate that. You do such a phenomenal job. To think that you heard me and weren't turned off immediately by podcasting. Thrilled to learn it.
Far from it. Quite the opposite. So Let's start at the beginning of your MS journey. I think you're diagnosed in 2008, if I remember reading correctly.
Yes,
What led to getting that diagnosis, and how did you feel when you got it?
Well, numb. So what led to it, I woke up one morning. I had two little girls, 4 and 6 years old. And I got up like every other morning, running around, making breakfast and whatnot. And I sat down with my coffee. That might've been different. I normally didn't sit down. I sat down with my coffee and I looked out the back window, and I couldn't have told you what was wrong with my vision, but I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't, everything looked weird to me. And I was extremely, what I now know as fatigued. But I was always tired. Again, I had two little ones. So I was and I was a stay-at-home mom. I was really tired, but this was a different tired. So eyesight is jacked up. I'm tired, more tired than usual. Pretty soon I noticed that I had some numbness and tingling. It was all very strange. I was doing some marketing from home at the time, and one of my clients was an ophthalmologist, and I was working on a big project for him. And truly, as the day progressed, I felt worse and worse, and I really believed that it was the flu coming on. So I dashed off a quick message to him saying, I'm really sorry. I'm not going to be able to do this project. I'll try again for next week, but I am coming down with the flu and I'm feeling really bad. In fact, like I'm starting to see double. And he got back to me immediately and said, can you meet me in my office tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., which I knew was before he opened. And I thought, he doesn't think this is just the flu. That was my first indication. So I went and he took a look, with one of those horrible machines that get way too close to your face. And he said, okay, this is sixth nerve palsy, which is not an answer. That's actually a symptom. So we need to get you in for some MRIs and whatnot. Whatnot was the lumbar puncture, but he didn't mention that part to me. And thankfully, he and his wife were also friends of mine, and she was also a doctor. And so I was ushered through this process painlessly and seamlessly, as in he picked up the phone and called a friend of his that was a neurologist and said, can you get her in right away? And I went straight there. And he got me in for an MRI and a lumbar puncture a couple days later. The whole thing, all told, took about a month, which it's strange thinking back now that it took that long to get the answers, but it did, which is still much less time than it took for a lot of people, especially back in the day. But the answer was I had MS, and I couldn't even believe it. He said that to me before I even sat down. I walked into his office and he said, well, it's MS. I said, wait, what? Because I had done, what we all do and gone to Dr. Google ahead of time and had determined that it was likely one of several horrific things. And I had determined MS was the most horrific of the things it could be because, actually I was praying for a brain tumor because I had known 3 people, 2 of which were my brothers, that had brain tumors, that had them removed and lived happily ever after. And, that was the end of it. And I knew that was not what happened with MS. There was no excising the demon. There was no end. There was no cure. So when he said that to me, it's MS, I don't think that I understood what he was saying. I don't think I absorbed it. And so therefore I went even more numb than I walked in there. And when I walked out, I just was incredibly pragmatic about everything and went, okay, I need to get my mom here to help me with the kids. Check. I need to let family and friends know what this diagnosis is. Check. I need to pack lunches for tomorrow. It was just so, what's the next thing I have to do? I think it took a very, very long time for it to really sink in.
And once it did sink in, how long was it until you started the FUMS podcast? And why did you start the FUMS podcast?
You know what? I still honestly think I'm a little bit in denial. So I can't give you a real reference on when it sunk in, but I was diagnosed in 2008 and I started the podcast. I started the website first. That was just a blog to just share my journey in 2011. And that was because when I was, Googling and trying to figure out what this could be, and it was looking like MS was likely, there were no good uplifting sites, shall we say, available to me. It was all pretty awful stuff. So between 2008 and 2011, I saw that there was life to be lived after a diagnosis. And I just wanted to share that with people. And in terms of naming it FUMS, honestly, I wasn't really even aware. That was a gift from my psyche, I guess, because I wasn't even aware that I was saying that in my own head, but I was. I'd get up out of bed in the morning, particularly after a particularly bad night, and I'd think, well, FUMS, like, look at me. Like, you didn't get me this time. And I kind of took note that I was saying that a lot in my head, and it gave me power that I felt like I had been stripped of when I was diagnosed. And that felt important. That felt like I needed to share that with other people with MS. So I wanted to share that your life isn't over because you got a diagnosis, number one. And number two, here's a little tool that I use and it empowers me, and you can use it too. Just say FUMS. So that was the start of the blog in 2011. And then I started the podcast in 2015, just because I am Chatty Cathy, as you can tell. And I loved podcasts, and I felt really close to the people I was listening to. I felt like they were friends of mine, and I really wanted to provide that for others as well. I wanted to be in people's ears and give them a little hug and some good news.
I think your style and your attitude toward MS are perfectly communicated in the title of the book that you co-authored, Bowel and Bladder Issues and Multiple Sclerosis, by two pea brains with potty mouths talking shit about MS. It's a great title. It's a title that may never be improved upon by any book ever. And it's also a subject that we probably don't hear enough about, certainly the kind of stuff that isn't talked enough about. What made you decide to take on bowel and bladder issues in a book?
Well, I kept getting questions about it, and gratefully so, that neither of those were issues that I had experienced. I was asking my best friend Erin about it because she is, in fact, a pelvic floor dysfunction physical therapist. So as I'd get these questions in, I would ask her, and then I'd go back and answer them. And it was just not scalable. It wasn't smart use of this information. I knew other people needed to hear this too, more than just the one-offs. So I asked her to write a book. And she said, well, I will, if you will write it with me. I said, I have zero to contribute here. I have no experience with this. And she said, well, it's an uncomfortable topic, and you're frankly a smartass. So why don't you just put in your little smartass funny comments here and there and make it a little more palatable? So that's what we did. Like, she did the smart thinky parts and I did the smart assy parts, and they're different fonts and they're even different colors. Mine are, I think I landed on Cosmic Sans, and it's bright orange. So that it's me. But even things like, we touched on sex a bit. We do have plans of writing that book too. But so for instance, then when she talked about that and how pelvic floor exercise can help with that, then I said some smartass comment and linked out to some 70s porn music. So if you download that book, you get the benefit of that as well.
When I visit the webpage for your podcast, it promises information, inspiration, and motivation for living your best life with MS. So I have to ask, what would you say is the formula for living your best life with MS?
Well, I guess for me, it's probably been a little healthy denial. Definitely not spending too much time thinking about it, trying to find ways to help others has been probably the biggest asset in my life, period. And in this way, helping other people with MS be uplifted, I always say it's almost selfish because it feels so darn good to help somebody else. And it takes me out of my own issues. I've been struck by how often I'll do a podcast episode and really be interested in what the person is talking about that I'm interviewing. And at the end, and I say goodbye, and I'm sitting here and I take a breath, and then I think, oh my God, how long have I been hurting this bad? I didn't even notice it while I was doing that. So I think to the best of our ability, finding acceptance, certainly, because fighting is futile, doing our very best to take care of ourselves, and getting the hell out of our own minds.
Well, this may be the flip side of the same question, and I think you've already started answering it, but I'll go ahead and give you a chance to finish that answer. What have you found to be the hardest part about living with MS?
Certainly the uncertainty. The what ifs, which I try to avoid at all costs, but they're there. They're there, particularly when I get up to go to the bathroom at night. They are waiting when I crawl back into bed. They're saying, hey, welcome back. Let's really freak you out for a few hours. Just not being able to plan, just not knowing what's coming. It's a constant elevated anxiety level, which presents itself then flips around and presents itself physically to me as well. So it's a constant battle of trying to tamp that down, trying to breathe through it, and trying to be more accepting of it. Recently, my mantra has been quit thinking and trust, because all that worry and all that stress can literally only do harm. It cannot do any good. So I'm trying to just let that shit go, but it's very hard. That is definitely the hardest thing for me.
An awful lot has changed since you were diagnosed back in 2008. It's become easier to get an MS diagnosis, although I'll say that's for most people. In your case, I don't think it could get any easier.
Right? I know. Very easy.
But today there's many more MS medications available. Social media has become far more important today than it was in 2008, which means there's a lot more advice available online. Not all of it terribly accurate, some of it not terribly helpful, but there's no shortage of it either. So let me ask you, what advice would you give someone who received their MS diagnosis today?
The first thing I would say is breathe, literally breathe, because I bet you're not. You're very shallowly breathing right now. Breathe and know that likely it is not going to be as bad as you are projecting right this second. To your point, John, there have been so many advances made just in the time that I've had MS. And I am gifted with the knowledge of the copious amounts of research that are being done. And there's so much, and there's so much on the horizon. I always say, kind of half jokingly, there's never been a better time to be diagnosed with MS. So I would say to that newly diagnosed, breathe. Make sure you source your information and know that there's so much good on the horizon. There's solid evidence. There's solid medication available. There's lots of things that you can do for yourself in most circumstances. So breathe, learn, and trust.
Excellent advice. Let's talk about your newest project, because in addition to FUMS, you've recently launched a second podcast called Patients Getting Paid. In fact, it's a whole online community that you've created around this idea. So what can you tell me about Patients Getting Paid?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. My doctor, when I was diagnosed, said to me, and remember I was a stay-at-home mom at the time, he said, I'm so glad you're not working. Don't ever go back to work because stress is the worst thing for MS. So a couple things. I knew he had never stayed home with kids because that is the most stressful job ever. And what I heard actually was you should go back to work immediately and work full time. So that's what I did. When my youngest was in school full time, a couple of years later, I went back to work full time and I loved it. And talk about keeping my mind off of things. I often didn't notice the pain that I was in or the numbness or the tingle, whatever. I didn't notice it until I'd be driving home from work. So I loved it right up until I could not discern between the gas pedal and the brake pedal. And I didn't know which side of the road was the right one to drive on. And honestly, in retrospect, the last 6 months leading up to that I had had a few fender benders and it wasn't stellar. But that day for sure, that was my last day working for someone else. And I knew that I needed for everyone's safety, I needed to go home and take good care of myself. And I did. And I felt so much better because of it, dialed down that stress. I was able to get up when I was able to get up and take my medication on time and eat well, all those things. Didn't have to ask for time off when I didn't feel well, all those things that could only benefit me, right? But as I always say, my paychecks quit coming and my bills didn't. So that was a whole nother level of stress and anxiety. And remember, I was a stay-at-home mom. So I couldn't, for 8 years, I could not get disability. Because they base it on, I forget the number of years just beyond when you're filing. So I had to figure something out. And I looked around and noticed that I had this FUMS blog and podcast, and I had no clue how to monetize it, but I knew people did that. So I set on a course to figure it out. And there were so many scammers. I lost a lot of time, energy, and money trying to figure this out, trying to figure out how I could work from home, how I could capitalize on all the content I had already produced. And I also got involved with patient advocacy. I say a patient advocacy industry, and I'm using my air quotes here because who knew that existed? And by that, I mean, I actually overheard two advocates talking about writing articles about their experience and getting paid by publications like Healthline and WebMD and Everyday Health. And I tapped him on the shoulder. I'm like, excuse me, am I understanding this correctly? And they said, oh yeah, girl, like there's lots of opportunities out there. So I set about learning about those and, getting my foot in the door wherever I could. And, I did it, and I started writing articles, and I started producing podcasts for a big online health information company, and I started doing moderation for that company, and I was a guide for an MS app. I just got my name out there, and people started, companies started coming my way, and I figured out how to monetize FUMS. And bottom line, one day I was pulling weeds in my garden, which is where I think most clearly. And I realized that I had I was now making more money working for myself than I had been working for someone else. And I was able to, again, take better care of myself. And I didn't have to ask for time off to go see the doctor, whatever. And in that instant, I recognized not only was that phenomenal news, but I needed to share that news with other people who had chronic illness, that it could be done. And there's lots of avenues to doing it. It doesn't have to be patient advocacy. And so kind of the next breath, I realized I need to share this with people, whether it's a course or a membership community, which is what I landed on. And I'm going to name it Patients Getting Paid. So that's what I did. And it was a long time coming, but it is in fact a membership community with lots of trainings on the inside and condition-specific gigs. So we come at it from lots of different avenues, but bottom line, to be able to accommodate your health and generate an income from wherever you are. I mean, I've done lots of work from, hospital infusion centers and my recliner and my bed and my desk. So I felt like once I cracked the code, it was my obligation to share with other chronics.
So tell us, where can people find the FUMS podcast, and where can people find the Patients Getting Paid community?
Well, FUMS, they can go to FUMSnow.com. And the now.com on the end there is because when I just wanted FUMS ms.com, but that was already taken in 2008 by the First United Methodist School in Kissimmee, Florida. So I approached them and they weren't interested in selling that URL. So it's fumsnow.com. And Patients Getting Paid couldn't be easier. It's patientsgettingpaid.com. And all the info and both podcasts are at those URLs.
So with both podcasts, a book under your belt, any number of articles about living with MS that you've written, the moderation work that you do, what's next, Kathy?
Rest. Rest is what I'm thinking. I'm actually going on vacation next month, which I haven't done in a very, very long time, just for a week, but I can't wait. I don't know. I've kind of that ebook. I told you Aaron and I are going to write another ebook about MS and sex. I was approached about doing a TEDx talk. So I don't know. I immediately said no, but now I'm rethinking that. And I've always kind of been interested in writing a book. So we'll see. But first, rest. I'm really tired.
With good reason. Well, Kathy Reagan Young, thank you for all you do for the MS community. Thanks for continuing to find ways to inspire and motivate all of us. And thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/252. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into your email or text. And if you have a minute, I hope you'll visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Realtalk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or tablet. It's the best way for us to stay connected. The app will automatically download the latest episode of Real Talk MS. You'll be able to access any of our past episodes. You'll be able to save your favorite episodes. And it's a great way for me to share bonus content with you. The app is free, so I hope you'll download it today. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.